Today in the EU's plan to reshape its defense policy. As the EU gears up for a new era in defense, the focus is shifting to how the Commission and Parliament will align their differing interests. The new subcommittee's upgrade signals a stronger push for a unified strategy, but uncertainties persist. With a new commissioner set to take office, how will their approach influence the EU's defense policy? And with the Draghi report on the horizon, should we anticipate bold suggestions on defense? Hello and welcome. I am Evi Chiori, and this is Today in the EU. To dive into what the future holds for EU's defense policy, we spoke with our security and defense reporter, Aurélie Pugnet. Hi, Aurélie.
Hi, Evi.
It's been a long time.
It has.
So, why are we here today? What are we talking about this time?
We're here today to talk about a big priority for the next few months, the next few weeks, the next few days, the next few years, and the next mandate of the European Commission, which is defense. And what does that mean and where is this going? And it's important to talk about it because you hear it all the time. Defense, and yet not enough people.
We don't know the specifics.
Exactly. What are we talking about, really?
Yeah. Now, you were talking about this subcommittee, but you will explain to us what is exactly that was supposed to be upgraded. What does it mean for the EU?
So, the European Union in general is trying to grant itself a new role, in defense matters. When we talk about defense, really what we mean in that context and that conversation that we're having today is defense industry related matters. So that is what the defense industry can produce, what it can sell, where the member states should buy their products, should they build reserves and stockpiles. This is what really we're talking about. Competition as well, for example, and competitiveness of the industry. And the European Parliament, which is now entering back to work after being elected and the recess, has wanted to have a larger role in this because we're talking about more money. Von der Leyen apparently has estimated that European and Ukrainian needs in terms of money for the defense industry to develop that would be around 500 billion euros, which is a lot. We don't really have an idea of a timeline or anything like this, but that shows that there is an interest really in the EU taking a large role in this.
We Europeans must be on guard. We must refocus our attention on the security dimension of everything we do. We must think about our union as intrinsically a security project. And Central Europe has a crucial role to play,
said Ursula von der Leyen at the International Security Conference held in Prague during the end of August.
And the Parliament wants to be a part of it. The Parliament wants to have oversight. It wants to do its job as just monitoring what is going on, what are the member states deciding, and that also applies to the budget. And so far, the Parliament has had a committee, so that means a certain number of MEPs, members of the Parliament, that have been working on those topics, of defense topics, in what we call a subcommittee. So it doesn't have all the rights that it could have. It's not as involved as it could be on working on legislation and things like this. So they've been wanting to upgrade it, we say, from a subcommittee to a full-fledged Security and Defense Committee, and that should be happening in the autumn. And that would be a first step in showing that the Parliament is taking a role and is being serious about also monitoring what the Commission and the Member States want to do.
Just to take you a little bit back for our listeners to understand better, but also for me, the Parliament, until now, it has not been a part of Defense Committee or...
So the Parliament has a subcommittee, so it has a committee that works on the legislation and amends the proposal, just like any other committee, the one you have on environment, the one you have on energy, the ones you have on fisheries. So it has that capacity and has that right as itself. But defense being inherently a topic that is dealt nationally by the governments, by the member states, the EU, so the Commission, has not really been proposing much that would change that allocation, if you want, of power between the member states, the Commission, or the member states and the Parliament, maybe. So what is happening now is that the Commission has, over the past couple of years, since the war started in Ukraine, proposed that at the EU level, there would be more initiatives to do joint procurement together, to subsidize the defense industry together, to create, like I was saying, stockpiles of critical products for the defense industry. Shall there be a war at some point or another conflict where you need to help, I don't know, Moldova, for example, the way we did Ukraine?
Yeah.
And the parliament has always been involved, but it's been involved via middlemen, I would say. So, for example, it wouldn't be necessarily the subcommittee that would have automatically the right with its expertise to work on that legislation, but it would be the industry committee on one hand, the internal market committee on one hand, the CIDE committee on the other hand, so the security and defense committee on the other hand. And that created a lot of friction. And there were voices that said, well, it's difficult to use our expertise in a security committee and a defense committee when we are with a lot of other MEPs that are bringing in their expertise and there's a lot of clashes. And so it would be easier maybe to clarify that role. And the defense industry being such a specific industry, really, because you only have a very finite number of clients. So it's not just like any internal market. Is really something that you need to see it from a very specific perspective that is not just an internal markets perspective. It's really a defense industry or EU defense industry's perspective. And you can't forget about the national security aspects of it, that if the French want to only buy French, then they can only buy French and no one can force them to buy American, basically.
Now, what is the new program that is being discussed? So what's the point of having a new program anyway?
So the new program that we're talking about is called European Defense Industry Programs, or EDIP. Why is it new and what it is, so like I said, over the past couple of years, the Commission has proposed that at the EU level, Commission or not the Commission, takes a bigger role in subsidizing the industry and doing joint procurement, for example, which had never happened before. But everything that it's proposed was very much urgency related. So it was really to support the Ukrainians at that time or the Europeans at that time in replenishing their stockpiles after donating a lot of equipment or planning on a longer term for ammunition production, for example. Once that happened, the Commission thought, well, actually, and the member states did obviously as well, thought, okay, well, when we're talking about the longer term, we need something that is more sustainable. And so they put forward a program that proposes a large array of different actions that would include stockpiles and better way to organize joint procurement and make it easier if the member states want to all together buy a certain kind of weapon. It also proposes support to the Ukrainian defense industry. And so it can be described as I don't want to say almost an internal market for defense, but at least a European cooperation in general for all defense industries and all member states to work together towards one goal, which is to be ready if there were to be a war on the continent or if there were to be another shock that would have the member states thinking, oh, the industry has to scale up. Because so far the production has scaled up so that it can sustain the needs of the Ukrainians and the member states and other countries around the world maybe. But it's not sustainable yet. And the industry needs to invest in new production lines and machinery and reserves and all of that and supply chains.
Now, besides member states having to collaborate, it seems like the Commission and the Parliament will have to collaborate as well. Don't they have different interests? And when are they going to adopt a common approach, or when it will be clearer that they have a common approach?
So this big program has been under discussion already for a few months in the Council, so within the member states. It's created a lot of big discussions, and a lot of the discussions are about how much of a role do we want to give to the European Commission mainly.
Indeed. So how much liberty should it have?
So, for example, can the European Commission, or is it allowed to monitor the supply chains of the industries? Is it not? To which extent can it play the role of a matchmaking between the offers and the demands? Can it subsidize certain purchases and not others?
So what is the member states' view on this?
So obviously the member states are the most, I don't want to say reluctant, but obviously their industries are very much, or the way they handle defense purchases are linked to their national security. So you'll see, for example, that members like Poland, which is investing heavily into its defense and is spending more than 4% of its GDP on defense, wants to buy as much as it can from anyone and have that as fast as possible. And that includes buying, for example, American and South Korean. And that is based on its national security imperatives. But other countries would prefer that, like the French, for example, they would prefer to only buy French because they only trust themselves, more or less. And then they don't want to be dependent on the Americans or the South Korean when it comes to maintenance and export rules and all of this. So this is why you find that the member states don't want to give the Commission too much power, if you want, too much authority, too much monitoring, too much vision. Whereas the Parliament, for example, it's still going to be interesting to see how this new Parliament works and how the far right, for example, and more conservative right is going to react to this, because they're going to be quite nationalists and want to keep things in the governments. But they are usually asking for a lot more money to be put on the program, which is now very little. It's only 1.5 million. It may sound like a lot, 1.5 million, but for defense, it's nothing. So that's something to put in perspective. We're not talking about buying a house. We're talking about actually buying equipment, and an F-16 fighter jet is several millions. So you have to keep that in mind.
Right. How do you see this panning out then?
So the Parliament is definitely going to have to clash against the member states, because it's going to also want to have an oversight, and it's usually going to ask for a lot more budget. And the Commission is going to want to make sure that, you know, like they're supposed to keep the general interest. So they want to have more power in handling the conflicts and handling the matchmaking and handling the monitoring and all of this. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the three in the next year, because negotiations are going to go on for the whole year.
Yeah. Another thing that is very much anticipated when it comes to defense is the Draghi report. Taking into account that the letter report suggested some uncomfortable ideas regarding defense, do you think we should expect the same from the Draghi report?
I think that the Draghi report is obviously going to focus on the same topics, you know, competitiveness of the industry, internal markets. And they come from a place where they're going to look at the market and Europe in the very long term. And in the very long term, it's difficult to imagine that there will be no other war and that Europe can sustain defending itself just by relying on other partners, like the Americans, for example, without really thinking of just Europe first sometimes, you know. So I think it's going to be quite similar. And that means that we're going to hear a lot about Europeanizing a lot of the defense. So that means scaling up production. We're going to hear a lot about putting more money into it. We're going to hear a lot about more war-ready Europe. And it's going to definitely, I think, knowing that Draghi is quite a European, you know, person, and he's always had this European vision, I can't see really a space where he would say Europe has to be inherently only national and cooperation should be the exclusion idea instead of the logic. You know?
Now, you know, you mentioned the Americans, and the next few months will be very eventful. We have the elections in the US in November. What can we expect in that direction? How could this event and other events shape EU defense strategy?
So we hear a lot about, okay, what if Trump returns, you know? I think even before Trump, even under Obama and his administration, there's always been a will from the Americans, for the Europeans to take defense into their own hands and be less reliant on the Americans. You can buy American, but you can't just buy American is basically the idea. And you have to put a lot more money on the table is what they wanted. Trump said it very, very vehemently and very mean, I would say, but that was basically the same idea.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Now, the question is also, why is he saying this? You know, is he saying it because he wants to withdraw from Europe? Probably not. But we've heard a lot of his ideas about Ukraine and how there should be peace very soon. So there will definitely be the Americans shaping what the European continent will look like and what their relationship together will be. That said, the Americans under Trump are not going to leave NATO, so they're not going to leave the military alliance, you know. They will most likely ask for more from the Europeans, ask for more investment and more purchases and just to be more serious.
Over the last 2 years, Europe has shown and proven that a more sovereign Europe is not just wishful thinking. And at this point, let me be very clear. European sovereignty will make our partnerships stronger. It will never affect the importance and the need for our NATO alliance. In fact, a more sovereign Europe, in particular on defense, is vital to strengthening NATO.
But this program, for example, that the Commission put forward, that is being extremely serious about it. So that would most likely be seen in quite a positive way, unless the Europeans can't buy American, and then that would be an issue. But definitely, I think under Kamala Harris, we can expect an administration that is more
relaxed.
More relaxed, or at least not as endingly asking for a big change. And they can do it, behind doors, and they can do it more in a relaxed way, whereas Trump would probably do it while screaming on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's, I think, what we should keep in mind. And then the debate that they're going to have is going to be quite interesting to follow, to see.
Thank you very much, Aurélie.
You're welcome.
I am Evi Chiori, and this was Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. You can get in touch with us by leaving a comment or a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work, but also understand what topics you like listening to. This episode was produced by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada and me. Thank you for tuning in, and until tomorrow morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.